Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So today I want to talk about Zoro's new legendary sword. And so guys, there is a ton of speculation surrounding Zoro potentially getting a new sword and what that sword might be, but I'm hoping that this particular theory is something that you will not have heard before and something that you really can get behind. But let's start off with why it's a popular speculation to suggest that Zoro may get a new sword in the first place. And the reasoning is very simplistic. Zoro currently has 3 swords. Now, if you watch Checking 101's videos recently, he's talked about the sword rankings or whatever, but I'm essentially going to rehash that, which is there's levels of swords, essentially. We'll start off with named swords. If your sword has a name, it has a history, it's automatically put on a pedestal above other swords. And of these named swords, there's various rankings. The lowest tier is the Wazamano, or just the grade swords. Then you have above that skillful grade swords, above that the great grade swords, and the top of the line, the supreme grade swords. So all you really need to know is grade, and then skillful, and then great, and then supreme. Zoro currently has 2 great grade swords, which is the second highest tier, and 1 grade sword, which is the lowest tier. So to me and to other people, this seems odd, right? You would expect Zoro to have 3 great grade swords, or at least 1 supreme grade sword. But the Wazamano grade sword that he currently possesses just seems out of place. It is literally the lowest tier, and for end of the story Zoro, it just doesn't seem to fit. And to make matters even more interesting, Zoro's lowest graded sword also happens to be his cursed sword. And so this is kind of unrelated to my speculation, but I did want to talk about it just a little bit, which there seems to be a sort of religion about swordplay in One Piece. You might say it's diverging philosophies. And so it seems as though Zoro follows the philosophy of his sensei Koshiro, who essentially says this, the strongest blade is a blade that can protect what it wishes to protect, and cut what it wishes to cut. And he goes on to say this, in my opinion, a blade that cuts whatever it touches cannot even be considered a sword. And so at some point it seems like Zoro was able to master this philosophy, and it helped him defeat Mr. One from Baroque Works. Throughout One Piece as well, we get an inkling that each sword seems to have its own personality of some kind or another, basically the essence of the sword. And in the case of the Kitetsu, it's very clear that its personality goes directly against Zoro's and Koshiro's philosophy. The sword craves blood. And so the story of the cursed swords and the Kitetsus in One Piece actually lines up very well with this legend in Japan of Muramasa. It seems really likely for this particular legend to be the source of Oda's inspiration for the Kitetsu swords. And just as a brief little explanation, Kitetsu refers to the maker of the swords, and there's 3 of them, all of which are cursed. And so let's go on to Muramasa. Muramasa was an ancient Japanese swordsmith who, according to legend, prayed that his swords would be great destroyers. And because of the exceptional quality of his blades, the gods granted his request and imbued in them with a bloodthirsty spirit that, if not sated with battle, would drive the wielder to murder or suicide. And supposedly there are countless stories of Muramasa's wielders going mad or being murdered. And so essentially, these swords that he created are very similar to the Kitetsu as far as we are led to believe so far, in that they seem to be bloodthirsty, and without being sated with blood, then they will injure the user. And in this case, Zoro. And so it seems very likely, if this is the source of Oda's inspiration, that the Kitetsu that Zoro is currently carrying around with him is almost a constant battle for supremacy between the sword and Zoro. You'll hear this often spoken about in any theories relating to Zoro's eye. Essentially, the speculation is that Zoro has essentially closed his eye post-time skip on purpose, because doing so helps him control the demon which was created by the cursed sword within him. And if you think about it on more levels than this is a philosophical battle going on between the cursed sword and Zoro, if this is indeed true. Essentially, Zoro does not want to be a swordsman who cuts everything. Zoro wants to be a swordsman who can cut when he wants to cut. He wants to have full mastery over his blade, and the sword itself is rebelling against that. So you're really only left with two options. Zoro either must fully overcome the Kitetsu blade, or he must get rid of it. But anyway, back to the beginning of the speculation, it seems pretty likely that Zoro's cursed sword will not be with him by the end of the story, given straight its grade. Its grade doesn't seem to fit with his other swords, and it seems likely that his last sword will be his greatest sword, or at least on par with his other swords. And so, if Zoro at some point is not going to have this particular cursed sword, I'm of the opinion that Zoro, rather than perfectly mastering it, will instead, at some point, get rid of it, or it will in some way be destroyed. And so a lot of people speculate that Zoro will replace his cursed sword with essentially another cursed sword. There's 3 Kitetsu blades, he has the lowest ranked one, perhaps his last sword will be the highest ranked cursed sword from Kitetsu. And I'm just not a fan of the speculation. These are cursed blades, who have a spirit that desires blood and requires battle to keep its user sane. And so it goes against Zoro's philosophy of swordplay, and I just feel like those other 2 Kitetsu blades, if we see any of them or both of them, will actually be in the hands of villains, and Zoro will not collect them. And as I sort of implied earlier, I believe that Zoro currently is sort of being hindered, being hampered by his cursed sword. It requires effort from Zoro in order to contain its bloodlust. But anyway, not completely against the idea that Zoro replaces his Kitetsu with a better Kitetsu, but not a huge fan of the theory. There's some other theories as well, which I really have nothing negative to say about. There's various specific swords people have speculated Zoro will acquire. Pretty much every theory suggests that Zoro will acquire this new sword in Wano, specifically from some impressive swordsman from Wano, and I highly agree with all of these thoughts. But here's where I kind of want to diverge from what's commonly discussed. And so, how exactly do you have named swords in One Piece? You know, all these rankings of swords, etc. Why does this exist? Well, it's because these particular swords, which have earned names, had original sword owners whose skill was of such legend that these swords themselves that these famous swordsmen used became legendary. So before these swords were used by legendary swordsmen, they didn't have any names. They were just really awesome and great swords. Shisui, Zoro's most recently acquired sword, which he obtained in Thriller Bark, was the legendary sword of the legendary swordsman Ryuma. Before Ryuma became a legendary swordsman, we presume that he just used Shisui, but Shisui itself hadn't earned a name. But before Shisui had a name, it was still the very same sword today, which earned the great grade of the named swords. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you here is that just because a sword is named and given a grade doesn't necessarily mean it's better than other swords which don't have names and don't have grades. They were merely these swords that were possessed by legendary swordsmen. And so on a related note here, Oda introduced the concept of swordsmiths in One Piece with Kitetsu. Kitetsu made 3 blades. They were cursed blades, but they were very, very well made swords. And so, Kitetsu being a swordsmith, it makes you wonder if there are any swordsmiths living today who could recreate a blade of similar quality. And so, let me get to the point here. I wonder if there is indeed a swordsmith somewhere in the world of One Piece, and I, just like everyone else, would probably believe that this swordsmith would be located in Wano, that we would meet them in Wano somewhere. If there is such a swordsmith, I wonder if Zoro will get his own unique blade. I think we can all agree that by the end of the story, or by the end of the legacy of Zoro himself, he will have become a legendary swordsman. And I feel like him using legendary blades of other legendary swordsmen is awesome. But I think it even more awesome to speculate that Zoro himself will take an unnamed blade, a very well-made sword, and give it a name. A blade that's inexorably and uniquely linked to Zoro's own legacy as a swordsman. Not Ryuma's sword, not Koshiro's sword, but rather Zoro's sword. The legendary blade of Zoro himself. But anyway guys, hopefully that wasn't anticlimactic. I know a lot of people really enjoy speculations about Zoro's swords, and I hope that this measures up to your expectations for the quality of such series. I personally believe that there's a lot of possibilities, but I really like the idea of this, at least conceptually. However, as of right now, given we don't know of any currently living swordsmiths, it is highly speculative. But if we do hear of one once we reach Wano, you'll know that I'll be on that. But anyway, guys, that's all I really wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. Share your thoughts. Like the video if you like the video. Dislike the video if you dislike the video. Subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.